Some contenders announced themselves in March, but Jacksonville did the opposite. A team that won 13 games watched its 1,100-yard back, a second-team All-Pro linebacker, and a starting corner leave. Then they entered the draft without a first-round pick, with no splash signing that made those losses feel smaller. From the outside, this looks like a surprise contender that was quietly dismantled. And if your prediction is regression, the evidence is sitting right there. Jacksonville jumped from 4 wins to 13. It finished plus 13 in the turnover margin. It forced 31 in takeaways, intercepted 22 passes, and scored 110 points off those takeaways. Those numbers almost never repeat exactly year to year, and a fall towards 8 or 9 wins is reasonable. But football teams are not held together by transaction headlines. They're held together by the QB, the play caller, the language of the system, the structure of the front, and the answers that remain when the first plan fails. And Jacksonville has kept almost all of that. And the most gifted player on the roster is about to join the defense in a way he really didn't last season. And that is why the 2026 Jaguars are my AFC Trojan horse. Their 13 wins might have been inflated, but their status as a Super Bowl contender was not. What's going on, everybody? My name is Mason Rather, former college offensive line coach, and welcome back to the Coach's Read, where we analyze your favorite team and provide a preview going into the season. And inside of this video, what we're going to take a look at is what made the Jacksonville Jaguars tick in 2025, diving into their EPA per play on both offense and defense, and then taking that and projecting what their team's going to look like in 2026 with all of the changes. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So let's start by giving the skeptical case its full weight. Pro Football Reference expected record for Jacksonville was 11.8, not 13-4, and the Jags went 6-3 in one-score games. Their offense finished 6th in scoring, but only 12th in EPA per play. Short fields helped the scoreboard look far more dominant than the offense actually was. And that's the fragile part of 2025. The takeaway total can fall, the field position can normalize, and a few of the late game bounces can flip. And when we look underneath it, Jacksonville finished plus 138 in point differential, which put them as the 4th best in football. Its defense ranked 3rd in EPA per play, including minus 0.14 against the pass and minus 0.5 against the run. It allowed only 86 rushing yards per game, which was the best in the league, and not one opponent produced a 75-yard rusher. And that does not make the defense immune to regression, but what it does tell us is the unit was doing more than waiting for bad throws. Their defensive coordinator, Anthony Campanelli, built around one vision of a disguise and a pressure presentation. With Jacksonville's pass rush win rate was only 14th, even with Josh Hines-Allen producing 80 pressures. The defense changed the QB picture. It kept bodies around routes, and it turned hesitation in the back end into opportunity. And the interceptions were the volatile result of that. The structure that Campanelli's defense created helped create late throws, and that's the part that may travel into 2026. And the offense has something pretty repeatable too. Trevor Lawrence threw for 4,000 yards and accounted for a franchise record 38 touchdowns and played his best football during an 8-game closing streak. He finished as a very late MVP finalist because the season grew stronger as the pressure grew heavier. And a game that defined their season in San Francisco, Jacksonville won with defense, field position, and an 87-yard Parker Washington punt return. Against Kansas City, Devin Lloyd took an interception 99 yards. Then Lawrence recovered from a broken play where he fell down and scored the winning touchdown with 23 seconds left. The Jags were 4-1 and the new identity looked real. But then the Rams beat them 35-7 in London, and 3 weeks later, Houston erased a 19-point fourth quarter lead and dropped Jacksonville to 5-4. That was the moment the season could have become another Jags collapse. But instead, they beat the Chargers 35-6, and they didn't lose again in the regular season. They had 8 straight wins, a division title, and a team answering its worst moment with its best football. And Buffalo ended that season 27-24. 4 fourth-quarter lead changes, a 36-yard completion on 3rd and 1 during the deciding drive, 1 final Lawrence interception, and Jacksonville was close enough to belong and not clean enough to advance. And so that changes the standard for 2026. Getting back to January isn't proof. They've got to win. And that takes the names Jacksonville lost and we got to ask what jobs actually disappeared, because we look at Travis Achane's 1,100 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns. That was some real production, but the Jags still finished at a minus zero point 0.1 EPA per rush. And what they decided to do is not replace him with another expensive featured back. What they did is try to build it through the aggregate, through committee. They kept their young back Bashaw Tutin at the front of the room, and they added Chris Rodriguez, and then they drafted 2 tight ends. And what this shows is not proof that the run game will improve. It's trying to outline the bet that we can replace one player's volume with a committee, provide more blocking surfaces, and more ways to form the same concepts. And something that's still a head scratcher to me is Devin Lloyd's going to be harder to replace. He was a second-team All-Pro for a reason with 5 interceptions, and his job sat in the middle of a zone defense designed to keep eyes on the QB. Jacksonville did not spend an early pick on linebacker in the draft either. Boye Oluokun does remain, and Ventrell Miller and the internal options still have to prove they can carry routes, close windows, and survive play action between the hashes. And to me, that's not just a small concern. I think it's the biggest gamble they're making on the defensive side with this roster. But if we're looking at the subtraction math, this changes when Travis Hunter is counted correctly. He only played 162 defensive snaps last season. And entering 2026, he's listed as a starting boundary corner, and his camp work is tilted very heavily towards defense. And what I'm not trying to say is that Travis Hunter is going to replace Devin Lloyd, but what he does do is provide a different part of the equation. A defense from a 13-win team is effectively adding the defensive version of its most gifted player. And this same logic's going to apply on offense. Brian Thomas Jr. fell from 1,200 yards as a rookie to 700 yards in an injury and drop-affected second season, which makes you believe in a rebound. Parker Washington emerged out of the slot with 850 yards, and Jacoby Myers separates on schedule like he always does. And then you got Brenton Strange, who is working down the middle. If Travis Hunter can remain as a gadget-type selective weapon instead of trying to carry the entire receiving room, you can believe in the separations of roles. And so Jacksonville doesn't need every one of these players to become a star. It just needs their roles to keep the offense from becoming predictable. And to me, that's where the film matters. As the late season offensive tape rolls, do not focus on motion just because a player is moving before the snap. Everybody uses motion. Watch what the movement makes the defense declare. Watch where Lawrence's eyes start. Watch how the spacing preserves an answer when the coverage rotates after the snap. Those are the bones of what remains here. Lawrence, Liam Cohen's call, Grant Udinsky's installation, and a receiver room that has many different ways to win. I often have always said you want to build your receiver room like a basketball team. You want to have a point guard, you want to have a center, you want to have a small forward, you want to have a slashing threat, you want to have a three-point shot threat. You want different skills, and that's what they have in that room. And Jacksonville used 11 personnel last season on more than 65% of its offensive plays and produced positive EPA throwing and running from that grouping. The 2 tight end investment is not a rejection of that identity. I think it's an attempt to widen their library with more answers. And from whether that's 12 or 13 personnel, Cohen's going to be able to add a gap to the run fit, change the protection picture, condense the formation, and force cleaner coverage declarations. That can help a new backfield. It can also help the biggest threat to this entire thesis around this side of the football, the offensive line. I mentioned I was an offensive line coach before, which is where I gravitate. And right now, the current first group from left to right is Anton Harrison, rookie Emmanuel Pregnon, Robert Hainsey, Ezra Cleveland, and Walker Little. Cole Van Lanen is working back, while Patrick McCarty's back surgery adds uncertainty to the depth. And to me, this is a lot of churn in one unit that has to operate as 5 connected players. If the protection settles, the Jags may have enough answers to stay in the top half of the league offensively. If it doesn't, I think Cohen's going to have to shrink his menu, Lawrence's clock's going to speed up, and every other strength is going to become harder to access. To me, the line is not a footnote. It's the hinge for the entire bet they have made for that side of the football. Now, I want to take it back to Devin Lloyd's 99-yard pick six against Kansas City and freeze the picture before the throw. The point is not simply that Lloyd caught the football. Look at the pressure presentation. Look at how the route distributes the defenders. Look at the vision Jacksonville keeps on the QB and the throwing lane Lloyd is able to enter. That rep proves both sides of this argument. Campanelli's structure helped manufacture ball production, but structure doesn't make the player's job disappear. Somebody still has to carry the route, seed the throw, and finish the play. If the new linebacker combination can't do that, takeaway regression will expose the loss instead of normalizing the stat sheet. And the draft tells us Jacksonville understands the shape of these problems, even if I don't think they solved them very well, because they had one hell of a reach taking tight end Nate Borkacher at pick 56. Then they followed it up with another reach with defensive tackle Albert Regis. I could believe in Emmanuel Pregnon on the line and some depth pieces in the secondary. The early investment they went with was towards blocking surfaces, interior mass, and the defensive depth. And the goal is not to become one of these old-timey two tight end offenses on every snap. To me, I think the vision that they had is they're trying to make the same personnel capable of presenting run, protection, play action, and spread answers without telling the defense which one is coming. But the omissions does matter because they didn't draft an early running back or an early linebacker. And that means what Jacksonville is betting on is that Liam Cohen can manufacture rushing efficiency and Campanelli can protect an internal Lloyd replacement. And let's look at their schedule for 2026. Jacksonville opens up with Cleveland, travels to Denver, hosts New England, goes to Cincinnati, then plays Philly and Houston in back-to-back London games. The first goal is not dominance. They've got to try to survive and get to the Week 7 bye at 3-3. And after the bye comes the bank with Indianapolis, a Thursday trip to Baltimore, Tennessee twice, and the Giants. If this is a legitimate playoff team, they need to go 4-1 during that stretch. And then comes the stress test. Chicago, Pittsburgh on a Monday night, Houston, Dallas on a Sunday night. They split those four, and then they're able to beat Washington and Indianapolis to finish. The board's going to land right around 11-6. And that's the central point of this team preview. Jacksonville can regress by 2 or 3 wins and validate every warning about turnover variance and still be alive for the AFC South in Week 18. And that's where my board falls with this team. I have them falling at about an 11-6 team, a playoff team, an AFC South race that remains open into the final weeks. And I think that their floor is 8-9. And the only way that happens is if the offensive line never becomes 5 connected players, their takeaway total drastically drops, and the second level can't replace Devin Lloyd's absence. I think that their ceiling is right around 12-5 or 13-4, and that happens if Travis Hunter becomes a lockdown high-end corner immediately, Brian Thomas rebounds towards his rookie form, and the heavier personnel shift drastically improves this run game while still allowing Lawrence to operate the offense. The likely result lives between them, with fewer short fields, fewer dramatic finishes, and a team still difficult to solve because the QB, both systems, the receivers, and the defensive front remains intact. So going back to my original question, yes, expect regression, but don't confuse 13 wins falling to 11 means that Jacksonville's disappearing. The quiet offseason is the disguise. The concealed force is continuity, multiplicity, and a defense adding far more of Travis Hunter than it had a year ago. That is the Trojan horse. And here is where you can tell me the horse is empty going into this season. October 19th after 6 games in the London doubleheader. Jacksonville needs to be at least 3-3. The offense needs to rank in the top 12 in EPA per play, and the defense needs to remain top 10 against the pass without depending on another top 3 takeaway rate. If those conditions fail, the losses were larger than the structure. And if they hold, the Jags will survive the hardest part of the schedule with the most manageable stretch still ahead. And that's my read. A 10-7 playoff team and the most dangerous roster in the conference that nobody is talking about. Because the horse is already inside the walls. Trevor Lawrence in year 2 of this offense with both coordinators back and a front that never let an opponent run more than 75 rushing yards. And one of the best players in last year's draft is joining a defense that finished 3rd in EPA per play. I think that Jacksonville is built to be standing in February, and the rest of the league will find out come January. October 19th, though, is the receipt. I'm Mason Rather, and this was the Coach's Read.